Last time on Kamen Rider, Colonel Zoll met his demise at the hands of Hayato Ichimonji, aka the second Kamen Rider, but that was far from the end of Shocker. No. Undeterred by the setback, Shocker has sent Dr. Death to Japan to take another stab at the Kamen Rider problem. And if his distinct facial features seem familiar, it's because Dr. Death is played by Hideo Amamoto, a veteran of Tokusatsu. To name only a few of his many credits, he was Doctor Who in King Kong Escapes, the Toy Maker in All Monsters Attack, and there are his various appearances in the Ultra series, such as Return of Ultraman, which aired alongside Kamen Rider. And now, this. Garbed in a Count Dracula-like cloak, Dr. Death has a sickly, subdued demeanor, and represents a dramatic departure from the slimy theatrics of his Nazi-esque predecessor, though it's appropriate given the more supernatural direction that Shocker would begin to adopt during his time. Additionally, it would seem Dr. Death cares little about conquering Japan. Whenever he isn't directly targeting the heroes, his plots normally involve outright destroying the country itself. Thankfully, Hayato and friends have help in the form of Takeshi Hongo. Yes, Takeshi, last properly seen way back in episode 10, makes his long-awaited return to the series in episode 40, but that doesn't mean he immediately resumes lead character duties. No, Kamen Rider has very much become Hayato's show in the roughly 30 episodes since Takeshi's departure, and the filmmakers rightfully opt to ease viewers back into accepting the original lead. So, Takeshi makes a few guest appearances in the dozen or so episodes following Colonel Zoll's defeat, and gives viewers their first taste of Double Rider action. Besides Dr. Death supervising Shocker's Japanese activities and Takeshi occasionally lending a hand to the heroes, there aren't too many other major changes in the last bunch of the Hayato-led episodes. Although it should be said these episodes have perfected the formula started with Hayato's arrival, and Takeshi was to inherit this well-oiled machine. However, before that change in leads, there was the first original Kamen Rider short film, 1972's Kamen Rider vs. Shocker, in which the heroes must prevent Shocker from gaining the means to sink Japan. Following this film and one additional episode to say goodbye, Hayato bows out and leaves Takeshi to lead the show to its conclusion, starting with episode 53. And just like last time, the switch in lead brings plenty of changes. That said, these changes aren't as obvious or immediate as they were last time. Instead, the show gradually builds into a different experience over the course of 30-ish episodes. From the jump, as first seen in Kamen Rider vs. Shocker, Takeshi has 1. A henshin transformation of his own, 2. A fancy new belt that lights up, and 3. Starting in episode 53, an updated costume. From this point on, the gloves and boots are silver, and thin double white lines go down the arms and legs, as opposed to the completely black limbs he had until now. By the way, on the subject of costume changes, the Shocker henchmen are now dressed in their iconic skeleton-themed uniforms. Also, apparently having suffered one too many losses, Shocker has transferred Dr. Death to South America and placed Ambassador Hell in charge of handling Kamen Rider once and for all. Yet, relocation or not, Dr. Death continues to have a presence throughout this phase of the show. He returns to Japan on a few different occasions to support the efforts of Ambassador Hell, and, one can assume, redeem himself. Nevertheless, like Colonel Zoll before him, he eventually reveals his terrifying kaijin form and bets it all on combat with Kamen Rider. And though he proves a formidable opponent, in the end, things don't turn out any better for him than they did for the Colonel. This leaves us with Ambassador Hell, set to be the greatest of all Shocker Commander-in-Chiefs. While not as outlandish as his outfit might suggest, Ambassador Hell embraces an excited, exaggerated acting style. Also, with Hell at the helm, Shocker's schemes regain a sense of reason and that they are less eager to wipe Japan off the map. By the way, due to the last film being a rip-roaring success, there was another film not long afterwards titled Kamen Rider vs. Ambassador Hell, and like the film before it, it's basically an extended television episode. Also, much like the commanders before him, and as correctly noted by the women, Yep, Ambassador Hell is driven to desperation too, and the outcome of it should be obvious. But there's something more interesting that happens here, and it's the foreshadowing of the threat to come courtesy of Crabbat, a mysterious entity who heckles the heroes in the final days of Shocker. But more on that later. On to the Tachibana Racing Club. While the overall team structure remains more or less the same, not everyone from the previous phase has made it this far, or makes it all the way through this phase, and so they are replaced along the way. The most significant example of this would be these kids. Naoki is played by Tomonori Yazaki. He is probably best known as Ichiro from All Monsters Attack. Related credits include a few major appearances in Ultraman Taro, as well as Daigoro vs. Goliath. Anyway, these two are introduced as Goro's friends, and once Goro leaves the show, they become reoccurring characters who lead to a new concept. The Kamen Rider Kids Corps. It's a loose organization of children across Japan who alert the heroes to the activities of Shocker. Yes, you can question the ethics of using kids like this, but it's refreshing to see the heroes take a more proactive approach to dealing with the villains. On the topic of the safety of children, the show slips in this PSA.
Kamen Rider のライダーキックはな、仮面ライダーだからできるんだ。子供のお前たちには無理だ。真似をすれば怪我をする。いいな。
This would suggest that children at the time were imitating the action they saw on television. And yeah, the death-defying stunts in this show are not things children should be trying at home, or anywhere for that matter. If I haven't conveyed this yet, Kamen Rider is wild. Anyway, on to the other characters. The longest-serving members of Tachibana's racing club are Yuri, Taki, and Tachibana himself. First, the ladies. Look at the women assembled here. Of these four, the only one left is Yuri, and while characterization for her and the others was always minimal, she made a positive impression anyway, so it's cool that she manages to stick around. And to make up for the ladies lost along the way, in episode 70, Yuri introduces new friends, the latest and final revision to the ladies of the Tachibana Racing Club.
Kaicho!
Oh, Yuri ka.
私のお友達なの。今日からレーシングクラブの仲間にしてもらえるかしら。
おお、いいとも。
ヨットです。チャゴです。
Next is Taki. Everyone's favorite FBI agent remains just as relevant as ever, and doesn't miss a beat despite the change in leads. He clicks with the now well-adjusted Takeshi just fine. Things are back to business as usual between Takeshi and Tachibana. In his very first episode after taking over again, Takeshi is being mentored in motocross racing by Tachibana before getting chased by Shocker. If that sounds familiar, it's because the same thing happened in the very first episode with Man Spider oh so long ago. On that note, with Takeshi back behind the wheel, there's a greater emphasis on biking again, and the show pushes that angle with some big set pieces. Photography was more of Hayato's thing anyway, apparently unless you're a woman.
で、ご用件は？
そうそう。ねえ、私をカメラのモデルに使ってくれない？
お断りしたはず。俺は女性専科じゃないの。
ダメかな。こんな可愛い子ちゃん、放っておく手はないと思うんだけどな。
さあ、お帰りはこちら。
But don't worry, that attitude changes later. Oh yeah, about Hayato. Don't think for a second his departure back in episode 52 was anything permanent.
お久しぶりです。Hayato! お前だったのか!
Starting with episode 72, he returns to Japan every once in a while to help Takeshi and the others out of tough situations. The man, only having gotten cooler since his time in South America, comes back with mad drip. His rider clothes have been updated as well. To distinguish him from Takeshi, he now has red gloves and boots. The single bold white line down the arms and legs of his uniform has always been there, and remains as another distinguishing element. Anyway, Hayato's appearances are always a treat, and allows for more glorious double rider insanity. While an increase in budget around this time in production might also be a factor, I assume working in a different medium was a valuable learning experience because the leap from television to CinemaScope did wonders for the cinematography, and that carried back over to television for future episodes. Prior to Kamen Rider vs. Shocker, the camera work was always on the inconsistent side of things, sometimes exceptional, other times functional at best. Now there's plenty of eye candy to appreciate, and the show is all the better for it. For example, check out the complexity of this scene and the layers of action between the foreground and background. Even the drama scenes showcase greater imagination and staging. The fighting has only continued to improve as well. This effort on the part of the filmmakers has not been in vain, as watching the evolution of Kamen Rider has been a fascinating ride. It has truly come a long way since its earliest episodes. Besides the visuals of the original opening sequence, you know, the hero crossing the countryside on his bike and the red scarf flowing in the wind, or the darkness of those early episodes, I dare say episodes 40 to 79 just might best represent Kamen Rider as it occupies popular consciousness today. The idea of the double riders, their color-coded uniforms with glowing belts or how they usually still get depicted, are referenced in media and merchandise. Takeshi's Henshin transformation sequence superseded Hayato's transformation sequence, and the skeleton-themed uniform is how most people seem to remember the lowest-ranking grunts of Shocker. Still, at almost 80 episodes deep, the formula had begun to wear thin, and thus the show was in need of a significant overhaul. So, as mentioned earlier, Crabbat was a sign of things to come. With Ambassador Hell's defeat, the great leader, the one who rules Shocker, decides to abandon the organization as it has existed up to this point, and gives the heroes this dire warning.
Kamen Rider! ショッカー日本州はたった今放棄する。そして恐るべき組織が作られるのだ。また会おう、仮面ライダー!
What does it mean? Well, we'll get into that next time. But, for the time being, what are your thoughts about the phases discussed in this video? Is there any character you miss? Who's your favorite kaijin? Which commander do you prefer? Death or Hell? What's your favorite episode of this bunch? And, are you glad to have Takeshi back? Share those thoughts in the comment section below, and hopefully, we'll see you again next time for the last 18 episodes of the original Kamen Rider.